we've got ginger or the mint. The mint, okay. Can I get you something to drink?
Oh, I'm good.
Okay.
Well, why don't you grab a chair?
Yeah.
Yep, sit down, let's go.
Yeah, she's ready.
I'm ready, I've been ready.
Please sit down.
She's
Have a
ready.
seat. Yeah.
We've been sitting all day.
Yeah.
All right, well, as a store operator, I've learned a ton of stuff in the last year and a half. Health issues are directly tied with nutrition, and nobody is going to know that better than Malia Chapman. She is a certified nutritional consultant, and she's going to put on her presentation tonight. So enjoy, guys.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, thank you to Wendy and Chris. This was kind of an interesting little rendezvous, if you will. It was New Year's Eve, and Neil and I were waiting for a movie, and we wandered in here, and I said, "What's your story? What is this store?" And I fell in love with the concept, and we started talking, and of course, within 5 minutes, I will get you to talk about nutrition, because it is my passion. And it's been my passion for a long, long time. It's my passion to help others. And so when I mentioned, we started talking about things like GMOs and all of that, and we said, oh my gosh, we really need to get you here and talk. And any opportunity that I get to stand in front of people and give them a little bit of education, that just makes my week. That's what I'm all about. So tonight, we're basically going to touch on the tip of the iceberg, if you will, because this is a very big conversation. And nutrition, you know, I mean, there's so many different aspects, if you will, or facets of nutrition. So tonight we're going to take one little bite. And our conversation, I mean, if you have any conversations with anybody around nutrition, it's frustrating because 1 week it's coffee's good for you. The next week there's a study out that says, oh no, coffee causes this or coffee causes that. And it's the same thing with chocolate. You know, for a while we heard dark chocolate was really good, and then studies came out and said, well, you know, it has to be a certain percentage before it's really good. It has to be 79 or 80% cacao before it's really good. Most people don't eat that. Most people eat Snickers. So, you know, so there's so many mixed messages out there that it gets really, really confusing. So tonight my hope is that we're going to just open your mind just a little bit and let you know that this is a really big conversation, and I'm going to give you the tools that you need to be able to go out there and investigate if you choose. Okay? Just basically want to increase your awareness. And tonight you're going to know the difference when you leave here between real food and processed food. You're probably going, what is she talking about? So I know that our world is a busy place. You know, Neil and I have raised 2 daughters, and I know what it's like when you're trying to get from work to pick up the kids and get to sporting events and then get home and try to put something decent on the table to eat. And it's a challenge. And so you know, we've all got our obligations, and unfortunately we sometimes end up with very poor food choices. But that's because on every single street corner there is a fast food restaurant. And I don't just mean the McDonald's or the Carl's Jr.'s or the Wendy's. I mean so many of the restaurants that you go in and are seated at, that's still basically fast food when you realize what they're feeding you. They're feeding you packaged, processed foods. My goal is not to have you not ever want to go into a restaurant, but the goal again is to educate you and give you some information so that you can make healthier choices and ask questions when you go into a restaurant. We go into a restaurant and the poor server that comes over to our table, first thing I say is, do you have any organic or local sustainable field greens? Do you have anything that is local and perhaps organic? And in some cases they do, and that's what I'll order. In some cases they don't. And then the next question is, do you have any free-range chicken? And many of the restaurants today do. They do have one entree that's a free-range chicken. So if you start asking these questions, what happens is, I've even talked to restaurant owners. You know, they'll come over to the table and they'll chat with you, and you can tell them where they can get these things. You know, we have a farm in San Juan, South Coast Farms, that has a plethora of organic vegetables that they grow, and that farm has been organic for 10 years. So sometimes you can be a conduit for the rest of the community by just opening, that conversation with people in a restaurant, the proprietors, because they want to serve you the food that's going to keep you coming back and keep you sending a message out there that, go eat at that restaurant because they have this. So I always tell people, don't be afraid, as long as your demeanor is such that you're not judging and you're not, being, nasty in any way, that you should be able to have these conversations with people who are feeding you. So if you look at some of the food choices that we have today, and I work in an office with about 160 people, and I don't even want to look when I walk down the aisle at the cubicles with these kids, the food that they're eating. Most of it's microwave food. But many of them have big bags of potato chips and Fritos and all of that because they sit at a desk all day and they're sitting there munching on whatever we want to call these foods, processed foods. But that's why we're seeing so much in the way of allergies, headaches, obesity, you name it. And, it's become a real epidemic. Our food choices are it's really a sad situation. So, okay, so what is food? Well, I think the greatest obstacle to optimal health, isn't our ignorance. It is the illusion of the knowledge we think we have. And I say that because how many times do you go into a grocery store and pick up a package because it says all natural? You're all of a sudden feeling very secure that this product is good. So most people will not turn the box over or the can over and read the actual ingredients because it's all natural. It doesn't have any trans fats, which is another big buzzword. No trans fats. So it creates a perception that it's safe. And we're busy, we're tired, we're in a hurry, it says all natural, we're going to buy that. So my goal today is to have you look under the covers just a little bit more. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the different kinds of food that are available to us. Wild food, okay? So think of wild blueberries. They're grown in the wild. There's no interference whatsoever with man. That means we haven't sprayed anything on it. We haven't helped it through its journey of growing. So that wild blueberry becomes very strong and very resistant to pests because it has to fight its way to stay alive. Consequently, wild blueberries happen to be the most nutritious of all the blueberries because they have the highest amount of antioxidants in them because they're constantly fighting, they don't have a farmer putting pesticides out there to kill the insects or anything. So if you can get wild blueberries over conventional and even over organic, you're further ahead. So, and you will see wild blueberries, they're usually frozen in the stores, and you can get organic. I don't know why they say organic wild blueberries. And I think that means because once they've been packaged, they haven't had any chemicals added to them at all, any preservatives or anything like that. So if you can get that, then you're further ahead. So the next step down from wild would be organic. Now the cool thing about organic, besides the fact it is not sprayed with any pesticides, is that the farmers that grow organic, they farm the way our great-grandparents farmed. They actually rotate crops in the soil, which gives the soil the ability to refurbish itself, if you will, with all the great minerals and nutrients. Factory farmers, conventional farmers, will grow only wheat, or only soy, or only corn. And that poor soil just gets completely voided of all the nutrients because that crop is just pulling it out, crop after crop after crop. So organic gets their crops revolved so that you actually have optimal soil conditions. That rotation, again, is the old way of farming. So if you talk to a farmer from the Midwest or Central California and you talk about crop rotation, they light up because that's the way that they did it years ago to keep the crops at the highest level of nutrition. The next thing we're going to go into is conventional food, which is basically if you shop at a Ralph's or Vons or Food for Less or Costco, although Costco does have a fair amount of organic produce, most of the produce that you see in your grocery stores are going to be called conventional. Conventional produce can come from this country, can come from Mexico, can come from Argentina, can come from Brazil, can come from wherever. A couple of issues with conventional produce. One is you don't know what's been sprayed on it. okay, and you know that it has been sprayed. Now, if you've ever driven across the state of California, gone through Central California, and you see these trucks pass you with these green balls in there, and you're wondering, what the heck is that truck carrying? Tomatoes. Tomatoes are picked almost 100% of the time, picked before they're ripe, and then they're taken to these cold storage warehouses and they're gassed. That brings the color up, and then they go to the grocery store. So conventional produce can be adulterated in many different ways. So anytime you can buy locally grown organic produce, you're light years ahead of anything that you can buy in the grocery store. Unfortunately, some of the worst crops, and Wendy has a nice handout for you. We've got some goodies for you to take that are resources. Some of the most highly sprayed plants and fruits and vegetables are things like strawberries. Strawberries in California, we're the biggest provider, if you will, or purveyor of strawberries in the country. And it's almost scary to think of how they're being sprayed. In our home, we don't eat any strawberries unless they're organic. And we are blessed with South Coast Farms being down the street, so we can get strawberries throughout the entire season that are completely organic and unsprayed. And I have to tell you, you could just eat them by the handfuls and feel good that you're getting all the antioxidants and all the nutrients and not getting any pesticide. And then at the end of the season, you're allowed to go there and pick, which is fun. There's not a huge amount, and they're smaller, but it's still fun to get in the ground and actually pick your own strawberries. So the next food that are populating our grocery stores, if you will, are what's referred to either as GMO or GE. So that's genetically modified organisms, genetically engineered. It's the same thing. They're basically foods that have been tampered with on a biotech level, and their genetic structure has been changed. So you're wondering, well, okay, so what? Didn't we years ago used to splice plums and peaches and different fruits together and it didn't hurt anyone? Well, I'm here to give you just a little bit of information about what a GMO food is and why you should be very concerned with consuming these foods and how you can avoid them. Genetically modified foods are basically a food that the DNA has been altered to make it resistant to pests. So let's start with corn, because corn is the most highly, I'd say probably we're at 95 to 98% of the corn that's grown in the United States of America is now genetically altered. It's owned and patented. Yeah, it's owned and patented by Monsanto. And if you know Monsanto, Monsanto is the company that manufactures Roundup. And Roundup is a very lethal pesticide. And what they've decided to do, and they started this back in the early 90s, so it's just been quietly happening. And what they decided to do was they wanted to own the corn. And so patenting this corn would allow them to own the seeds. Now, years ago, and still today, organic farmers save their seeds from one season to the next. They clean and save their seeds. That's a big part of what they do. And then they use the seeds for the next season. Well, with genetically modified seeds, they're only good for one season. And let me tell you what they do. And I'll take corn for an instance, okay? They take the corn into a biotech laboratory, and they actually use, there's 3 different processes they can use, but one is a gene gun. That's what's used most. And they actually put it into a petri dish under a big, huge magnifying microscope, and they shoot into the DNA a toxin, a Bt toxin it's called. And they're doing this so that you can spray the crops multiple times and not kill the crops, but kill all the weeds that are around it. The idea in the very beginning of this was to create more food, an abundance of food. What's happening is these weeds are becoming more and more resistant to the Roundup that they spray, the pesticides. So whereas maybe our corn 10 years ago or 8 years ago was only sprayed twice a season, now it can be sprayed 5, 6, 7 times a season. And it's sustained. The corn doesn't die. The weeds around it die. But here's the scary thing. The corn has a predator. It's called a corn borer. It's a worm, little fat worm, and that can destroy corn crops. These borers go in there and they start to eat the corn. Well, with a GMO corn that has been genetically modified with Bt toxin, a corn borer will go into the corn, take a bite, and die instantly. This is the corn that is coming to our grocery stores. And I tell you this again, not to scare you, not to frighten you, but to give you the tools that you need so that when you're going to make a purchase of corn, you're going to be seeking organically grown corn. You're not going to be getting conventional corn. We have children that live in the Midwest, in the middle of the Corn Belt, if you will. And I happened to be there last summer, and we drove around because the kids like to go to the farms and see the animals. So we were on a little journey to go visit the farm. So the farmer was out there, and the kids went up to look at the animals, and I started quizzing the farmer, of course. And I introduced myself and told him I was from California, and I said, so these cornfields are yours? And he said, yes. And I said, what kind of corn are you growing? He says, we only grow Bt corn. And my heart just sunk, because I realized that my kids are living in the middle of an environment where they're spraying time after time after time the toxins to combat, the weeds around this corn. And he said the farmers in that area have been pushed out. They all only grow Bt corn right now because they can't afford to grow the other corn. So it's a real interesting situation. So Bt crops are actually far more dangerous than just the spray. Okay, so the Roundup spray is very dangerous. Okay. So if you're living in an area or you're eating the corn that's been sprayed, yes, you're peeling the corn, and yes, you can wash the corn, so you're going to get rid of some of the spray that's on it. But when you're talking about a genetically modified corn, that is bred, that Bt toxin is bred into the DNA of the corn. There's no getting away from it. Okay? There is no getting, you can't wash it away. There's nothing you can do. There have been a few studies, okay, very few studies. The FDA goes on record of saying that genetically modified foods are fine. They're absolutely fine, but that's because there hasn't been any real long-term studies. But there have been some mice studies because there's been a lot of pressure. Some of them have been done in other countries. So the government of Italy did a small mouse study by feeding these little guys the Bt corn for 30 to 90 days. And they started surfacing multiple immune system responses. Okay, so autoimmune disorders in this country are rampant. You get people now, more people have rheumatoid arthritis, fibromyalgia, Hashimoto's thyroiditis, I mean, you name it, and autoimmune diseases are rampant. And our medical society knows not what to do with that. They don't know what causes it, and the fact that these little mice were fed Bt corn for 90 days and started to show signs of autoimmune disorder is, to me, very alarming. It's very alarming. Another study was done by the government of Austria, and this was done back in 2008. And when the mice were fed GM corn that was a combination of Bt and Roundup Ready, the more they ate, the less babies they had, and the smaller the babies were. That is very disturbing, I think. In a study that Monsanto did, because they were forced to actually do a very small, they did a rat study on Bt corn because there was a lot of pressure on them. They ran a 90-day study, and the indications for liver and kidney toxicity were huge. Blood pressure problems, allergies, infections, and diseases, higher blood sugar, and anemia. And I've actually seen the lab photos of some of these animals, and when you see the mice and the rats that were procreated, they're half the size, if not less, a quarter of the size of the generation before them. So it's, to me, I don't need to sit back and wait for human studies. And unfortunately, what's happening in this country, because we're not labeling these foods, the European nations have either banned the production of genetically modified foods, or they have rallied for labeling. So if you go to Austria or you go to Germany or Italy, if there is a product that has a genetically modified ingredient, it says so on the label, which is fine. You know, I mean, that way you can make your choice. You can say, hey, that's got GMO soy in it, maybe I want it, maybe I don't. But at least you have the opportunity to say yes or no to what goes into your mouth and the mouth of your children. So that's what we're hoping we can eventually secure here in this country. And the way we're going to do that, I think, is just by educating consumers. The future of food. I mentioned that we have a resource page for you that's going to give you some websites to go to, but I would highly recommend, if you really have an interest in this conversation, if this at all intrigues you and you want to understand it, I would go to the Future of Food. It's about 85 minutes long. It's free. You can view it online. Sit at your computer, plug it into your TV, whatever, and watch the Future of Food. And you'll fully understand the big picture of what's going on with genetically modified foods in this country. And right now, primarily, we're looking at corn, we're looking at soy, we're looking at cotton, and we're looking at canola and some sugar beets. Also, there's the whole thing about the frankenfish. I don't know how many of you know that the farm-raised salmon that they're doing right now, they're doing horrible things with that. But again, I would say watch, take the time to watch the Future of Food, go to their website, and you'll learn probably more than you ever really wanted to know about the truth behind the unlabeled, patented, genetically engineered foods that have just quietly made their way to the shelves of our grocery stores without us knowing about it. And I think that's the thing that upsets me the most as a mother and a grandmother now, to know that my children may be shopping in a grocery store and buying a product that has genetically modified corn. What if it's cornflakes? What if it's, something that seems so innocuous, something that we've eaten years after years, generations after generations, and nobody's telling us now that those cornflakes are not the same cornflakes that you had 15 years ago or 10 years ago. So that I find extremely disturbing, that my kids won't even know what they're buying when they buy a product on the grocery store shelf. Now they have to live with me, not live with me, but they have to see my texts and my posts on Facebook and my blog site and all of this, so they're afraid to not get foods that are organic, and they're sure that when we come to visit they have a fair amount of organic foods in the home. But they're very smart when it comes to things like GMO foods, and they stay away from them as much as they possibly can. Now the one that you guys are probably really familiar with when I say corn is high-fructose corn syrup. Now there's been controversy about that for quite some time, such that the corn growers started to do commercials. And you may have seen these commercials with mom walking through in the park with her kids, or dad with the kids, and saying, my children are my life and I would never do anything to harm them. And that's why I did the research on high-fructose corn syrup, and I discovered that there's nothing different from sugar or high-fructose corn syrup. It's all the same thing, sugar, sugar. I see those commercials and I want to break the TV, because there's nothing further from the truth. High-fructose corn syrup is a chemical soup. It's not, and the reason that manufacturers are using it is cheap, it's plentiful, and it does not, it's very, very stable. So sugar's more expensive, sugar's not as stable. So high-fructose corn syrup has become the sweetener, if you will, for many processed foods. And I promise you, things like breadcrumbs. I went on a rampage, I don't know how many years ago, and went through the pantry in our home just to make sure that there wasn't anything in there that I wasn't aware of. And I'll be darned if I didn't find contadina breadcrumbs with high-fructose corn syrup in it.
Wow.
So, why? That's the question, why? But I immediately went to my computer because it infuriates me. And I, went to their website and wrote them, a little message. Some of these manufacturers will reply to you, and they'll try to appease you. Some of them won't. They just won't respond, but at least you know you've done something. And the beauty of social networking, you can go on Facebook, and you can say, hey, guess what I just found? I just looked in my pantry and found, this ketchup, it has high fructose corn syrup in it. Why? So high-fructose corn syrup is in a lot of products. I mean, if you start going to the grocery store and turning over the jars and the cans and the boxes, you will see it in things that you never dreamed would have. For me, the breadcrumbs was the killer. I was like, why? So I end up now going to places where I can either buy organic breadcrumbs or I can go and just get the bread and make your own. Exactly. The American Academy of Environmental Medicine has stepped up to the plate, and they've said that animal studies indicate serious health risks, including infertility, immune dysregulation, accelerated aging, dysregulation of the genes associated with cholesterol synthesis, insulin regulation, cell signaling, yada, 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 yada. This is not a good statement. This is something to be aware of. As a matter of fact, in 2009, the American Academy of Environmental Medicine said that several animal studies indicate serious health risks associated with genetically modified food, including infertility, immune problems. Now, think about it. How many people do you know today that are going to fertility clinics because they're having problems having children? It's become a lot more prevalent than it ever was. We had our kids 25, 29 years, one of them 29 years ago. Infertility was hardly, that was just like occasionally you would hear that. Now it's becoming much more normal to hear of couples that have difficulty procreating. So you would ask yourself, what's behind all of this? And yes, we have pollutants in the air, we have pollutants in the water, so you can't escape it 100%, but you can certainly choose what you put into your mouth. So my thing is, pay for freshness. Go to farmers markets, go to places where you know you're getting fresh foods, fresh, local, sustainable produce. Spend your money there instead of on processed foods that are in packages. Buy fruits and vegetables that are in season because they're usually more affordable. And look for local organic farms that you can support. I know there's one in Irvine. The one that we have down in San Juan Capistrano is a big one. But they're scattered around. So, you need to be a little bit of a detective until you find these sources. Of course, Whole Foods does a fairly nice job of having a good selection of organic. Now, the challenge with those kind of markets like Whole Foods or Mother's, Trader Joe's does an okay job with some of it, but a lot of their organic stuff comes from out of the area, out of the country. And that doesn't really set well because you don't know what other countries' governments are doing as far as regulating their foods. But if you can find a farm or you can find a local supplier, then that's your best bet. But again, going back to Whole Foods or Mother's, just because you walk in the door of a grocery store that they profess to have a lot of organic and they profess to have natural foods, that doesn't mean that you can close your eyes and buy everything on the shelves in there and feel safe that you have wholesome, good organic food. You still have to be a shopper. You still have to be able to read labels because these stores do have things that have genetically modified organisms in them. So again, you have to be really good at reading labels. If you're going to buy frozen is fine. Just don't microwave it. If you're going to buy frozen and you heat it up on the stove, that's fine. Or it doesn't. Just don't take the frozen food and put it in the microwave. That's a whole other educational piece. But you're changing the molecular structure of the food. And trust me, if you want to go Google that and look at it, it's not really something you want to do on an ongoing basis. An occasional, maybe, but not a great choice. Okay, so how many of you love to eat meat? It's not a bad thing.
I do.
It's not a bad thing. Are you carnivores?
Yep.
All right. I like meat too. As a matter of fact, if you're blood type O, they say you're supposed to be eating a lot of meat. Here's the trick. Okay? You want to eat meat that is not produced in a factory farm, better known as a CAFO. Those factory farms are these big, huge, institutional-like places where they take all the cows sick and sick and sick and sick, and they slaughter them all together, and all the meat's mixed up, and you know not what you get. And what's happening is these animals are being fed antibiotics because they're kept in such close confinement that if one gets sick, the other one gets sick. So they have to continually give them injections of antibiotics or put that in their feed so that they don't transfer diseases because you lose a cow or, you're losing profit, right? So if you're going to eat meat, and I think it's fine to eat meat, you want to eat meat that is not from factory farms. You want cows that are not fed corn. Cows are not from your factory farms, okay? So that means your cheap ground beef that you're going to get from Ralph's or Vons or whatever, don't. Keep your beef, get the grass-fed, the organic beef, and just don't have it as often because it is more expensive, because there's not as much of that being produced as the garbage that's out there, unfortunately. The other thing that they do with these animals, besides the antibiotics, is they shoot them full of hormones, such that I have seen things that is so sad. These animals can't even hold up their own weight. Like the chickens, they fill them with such hormones that they balloon up in like 10 times the size of a normal chicken, so they can get more breast meat off that chicken and make more money, and that chicken can't, its bones haven't even developed to be able to support that weight. So these are chickens that are just sitting in the bottom of pens, can't move, can't do anything. So there's a whole thing about, the inhumane treatment, and I'm not going to get into that, that's a personal thing, but I will tell you that animals that are raised in that confined environment are not healthy animals. And if you believe in good energy and bad energy and all that stuff, you probably don't want animals that have been treated inhumanely to be part of your system. Okay, so what can we do on a lighter note to stay healthy? Sleep. How many of you sleep 8 hours a day? Okay. Really? Nobody? I do. I sleep 8 hours a night, and I don't wake up with an alarm clock, and yes, I do have a job. I have to go to work every morning. I don't have to leave at 4:30 like my husband, but I do have to be at an office at 9 o'clock. So I sleep 8 hours a night, and there is a great book, and I've given it to you. I've given you the information. It's called Lights Out, and it's a great read as far as understanding the importance of hormone balancing in sleep. And without good restorative sleep, you got nothing. You can eat well, you can exercise, you can take your supplements, and if you're not getting enough sleep, your whole endocrine system is a mess. So, and when you're young, we're resilient, we bounce back, no big deal. At least we don't think we need that sleep, but sleep is huge. Hydration. I don't know if I'm really a proponent of the 8 glasses of water a day story. That was a big thing. I know in the 80s when we were doing high impact aerobics, we all had our water bottles with us, and you still see everybody carrying their water around. I think hydration is very important, but whether it's green tea or mineral water or whatever your choice, as long as it's not a sugar drink or a lot of caffeine that's going to deplete, I think you're fine. And everyone knows you just don't ever want to feel thirsty. So if you're feeling thirsty, you know that you're dehydrating, you're not getting enough water. But water also flushes the toxins out of the system. So the first thing I do in the morning when I get up and go downstairs, besides pet my dog, is to fill up a glass of water, purified water, and that's the first thing I take every single morning. And then the next thing I do is I brew some green tea. So I'm getting fully hydrated first thing in the morning and getting everything moving the way it should. It's the best way to start your day. Stress. Anyone under stress? Anyone live a stressful life?
Stress, what's that?
Yeah. So stress can be a huge factor in our health. And everyone has to figure out how to manage their own stress. I like putting my CDs, yes, I don't have my MP3 thing, so I'm sorry. My technology is a little behind the curve. I carry a smartphone, but it's smarter than me. So my CDs in my car, I crank it up in the morning when I'm driving to work and when I'm coming home, and I sing along with my favorite music. And that, for me, is a huge stress buster. I don't open the windows because I certainly don't want people around me to hear, but that is one of the things that works for me. So finding ways to get the stress out of your life, whether it's walking, yoga, running, riding, whatever it is that you love to do, and getting out in the fresh air, those are things that are really, really good for you. Eating food that supports your health and not your doctor's wallet. And I say that tongue-in-cheek because most of what we eat supports our doctor's livelihood, because the food that we choose is not a good choice. Supplements, supplements are an individual thing. I do believe that we need supplements because we don't eat well every single day. So there are certain supplements. Nowadays, doctors can actually test you for your vitamin D3 levels. D3 is something that you want to consider taking unless you do get a fair amount of sun every day without sunscreen. If you're outside and you wear sunscreen, you are not processing D3 at all. It can't happen. I know. So that's a whole other topic about sunscreen. So there's nothing wrong with going outside and sitting for 15 or 20 minutes with short sleeves or a tank top or shorts or whatever, your bathing suit, and getting sun for 15 minutes without sunscreen. At least you'll get some vitamin D. So some supplements, I think, and again, that's an individual thing. I'm really big on antioxidants because of the levels of free radicals in our world today. We are bombarded by free radicals. There are some supplements out there that are better than others. I'm not a proponent of going into your local store, if you will, like just a regular drugstore, pharmacy, whatever, and buying, or grocery store and buying supplements, because you're going to get what you pay for. Okay, supplements need to be high quality. They need to be produced in a manufactured facility that's got some, governing over it, and so you really need to be particular about your supplement. If you're one of those that are taking a Centrum, I would say don't bother. It's a waste of money. Again, there are some that are much better than others, and that's something that you need to get out there and educate yourself about supplementation. But it is difficult to get all the nutrients that we need out of our food. Even if you're eating 100% organic, you'd have to be juicing and eating, and there's a lot going on. And good luck if you're that person. I want your life. You don't have a lot going on. So you're in charge, and that's the beauty of this whole conversation, is your food choices are going to dictate whether you have a life of allergies, painful joints, depression, osteoporosis, all those things that are surrounding us. And you're probably sitting there going, well, listen, I have a family history of cardiovascular disease, or I have cancer in my family. So my genes are tainted, if you will, and so why should I bother eating healthy, doing all these things if I know that down the line it's going to happen to me because I have a genetic predisposition? Well, I think one of the best seminars that I ever went to was listening to these doctors and scientists talk about our genetic predispositions, if you will, and how it's only about 2%. So if you have a family history of heart disease, that doesn't mean that you're going to die of a heart attack. That means that your gun is loaded, but it doesn't mean that you have to pull the trigger. Your lifestyle, your food choices, your behavior decides whether or not you're going to pull that trigger. So when people say, oh, I'm doomed, my family history, everybody in my family, every female's had breast cancer, that does not mean that that is going to happen to you. But people use that, they're lazy, and they just would rather eat the garbage and just go the way of, what they think their genetic predisposition is. So 3 important keys. The single most important thing that you can do every day is your food choices. Again, you can't always choose the water, you can't choose the air that we breathe, but you can choose what goes on your fork and what goes into your mouth. And to me, that's very powerful. You find the restaurants that serve you well. The first thing I do, this sounds really crazy, but when I go into a restaurant that I've never been into, you go into the restroom and you check out the restroom. Right. The restroom's clean, you got a better feeling that the kitchen might be clean. If the restroom's not clean, it's let's go. The other thing I do is I look at the door, the front door of the restaurant. If it's got a bunch of fingerprints and it looks like nobody's paying attention to cleaning it, that doesn't give me a really happy feeling either. So my poor husband, you can tell when we go into a restaurant, I got this look on my face. We're not gonna stay. So you need to be able to take control of your, of what you eat and what you do in your life. So here is the exciting news, okay? You can choose organic dairy, because dairy, believe it or not, those poor cows, like I said, they're fed RBST, which is a growth hormone. You don't want that in your body. The reason we're seeing our young girls at a very, very early age exhibiting things of puberty that they shouldn't be going through at a very early age is because I truly believe of all the hormones that are being put into the dairy products that kids drink from the time they're little babies. Now, there's been such an outcry on that you'll start to see now, especially at Trader Joe's. They have their own brand of dairy products, and if it's not an organic dairy product, they have a label on it that says cows not being treated with RBST. That's what you want to look for. If you buy a dairy product that doesn't have that label or is not organic, you can be 100% sure that that cow or the cows that milk came from are definitely treated with hormones, and those hormones are transferring right into your own body. So that's something really simple, because it's not hard to find dairies. There's a lot of dairies, and
is that the same as RBGH?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
RBGH, yeah, recombinant bovine growth hormone is what
Okay.
it's called. And yeah, it's been used for years. So what can you do? We're going to give you a handout with some of these websites: Institute of Responsible Technology, Environmental Working Group. Some of you may know of these. You can support healthy non-GMO brands by not buying them, because guess what?
We drive the market.
We drive the market. When you go to the grocery store and that gets scanned across the scanner, you're telling that manufacturer, this is good stuff, make more. I'm buying this. But if you don't buy some of the garbage that's out there, you're going to notice that that grocery store is not going to carry it forever, as long as you're not the only person not buying it. So the next step is to arm yourself with just a bit of education. And again, we're going to leave you with some ways of doing that. One thing I wanted to tell you is the RBGH that we were just talking about, the recombinant bovine growth hormone. This is so exciting to me because it proves that consumers really do have the power. In September of 2006, this whole big push, if you will, on putting pressure on the dairies to get rid of that. And what's happened is places like Walmart, Kroger, Starbucks, and actually about 58 of the top 100 dairies so far have actually removed the RBST from their cows.
That's amazing about Walmart to see that.
It is amazing, and it's because of consumer pressure, because that was, short of high-fructose corn syrup, RBST was the one big conversation that people had, putting growth hormones in our milk. So because of us and because of the pressure that we put out there, by not buying it and by talking about it, we hit a tipping point. And so now the manufacturers are pulling back. So that just shows you the kind of power that we have as consumers. So again, if there's one thing that I can leave you with, that's to know that you have the power to make this difference. We can make a difference. We can get rid of genetically modified foods if we choose not to buy them. I'm not telling you it's easy, because when you start reading labels, you'll see how difficult it is, because you will pick up, 90% of the processed foods in a grocery store have a corn derivative in it, some sort of corn, and or soy, including our own infant formula has soy. And if that doesn't say organic soy, you can bet that that soy has been genetically modified, and it makes me want to cry to think about an infant drinking a formula with a GMO soybean. The ancient Greek physician, you've all heard of Hippocrates. He's also known as the father of Western medicine. He believed that the body should be treated as a whole and not just a series of parts. He believed in the natural healing process of rest, a good diet, and fresh air. So we're coming full circle. There are doctors out there, there are MDs out there called functional medicine doctors. They will look at you when you come in with symptoms, and they will look at all facets of you and treat you from a medical standpoint on the whole body. So these are the kind of doctors we want more of, not just doctors that treat your symptoms. This is a non-GMO shopping guide we're going to give you. This is a great website. It's also on your resource list. And I'm the author of My Healthy Bite, which is a blog site that has an enormous amount of information. I keep things like some of my favorite recipes that I've designed and tested on my husband. You'll find a wealth of information on my blog, myhealthybite.com. So again, easy recipes, videos, superfoods, some ideas for supplements, just a great place to go. So I always recommend that you go there, and you'll find a wealth of resources. So once again, I want to thank Chris and Wendy for allowing me to come in and share this information with you. And if you have any questions, feel free to ask.
On the third slide back or the fourth, you had something about HFC or something.
High-fructose corn syrup?
Yeah, what was that about? I saw that on one of your bullet points 3-4 slides ago.
What's your question on high-fructose
Well,
corn syrup?
okay, so that's what it was.
Yeah.
That's accurate.
Yeah.
Okay, thank
Yeah.
you.
Yeah.
And
I never
it's-
heard it be like that. I've always heard the
Yeah.
full-on term.
Yeah, and let me just tell you, okay,
Yeah.
there's been a turn of events with high
Yeah.
fructose corn syrup. Because there's been such an outcry from consumers, and even medical people talking about, the products that have high fructose corn syrup in it, the corn growers have decided, the corn growing industry has decided to rename the product. It's called corn sugar. So we just get you educated
Hybrid
about
again.
not choosing anything that has high
Right.
fructose corn syrup, and you start looking at all your packages and all your boxes, and you go, "This is great. It doesn't have high fructose corn syrup in it, but it has corn sugar in it, which is the same thing."
And it can be confused with those or not. They can confuse it with cane sugar.
That's why they did it.
That's why.
they did it.
Tricks.
Because they were losing market share.
Right.
It's all about money, unfortunately.
Oh.
It's all about
Right.
money and politics.
And that high fructose corn syrup has actually also in the last 15 years transitioned from just being bad enough as it was to now being GMO-based high fructose corn syrup.
100% GMO.
Yeah.
100% GMO. And the sad thing is it's in so many things, and especially if your children are drinking soft drinks, eating candies, eating baked goods that are commercial, from the donut stores and all that. I mean, if I feel like I have to have a donut, I have to go in and ask them to show me that they don't have high fructose corn syrup in their frosting or their icing or whatever. And then you get to know who's using it and who's not. And you take your business to the people that are not using it. And it's amazing as a consumer the power we have, and we don't think we have. But again, just emailing a manufacturer or even making a post on social media,
Right.
about something that you've discovered, good or bad, is very, very helpful.
Well, thank you so much. We're thrilled that you came by and did this for us.
You are welcome. My pleasure. So just a little bit of education.
I've already heard that. Some of the